Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Mario Cristobal, the Miami Hurricanes, kicking off their spring game Saturday afternoon. And I think I speak for a lot of Miami Hurricane fans. This spring game is going to be really, really fun to go through and watch. I mean, you look at the amount of young talent that is starting to emerge during spring practice, all the buzz that we've heard from some of these young names on this roster. Now it's our opportunity to kind of see where these guys are at going into 2025. And, we've kind of said this all spring practice long. Look, we know that Miami's going to be a solid football team in 2025. They're going to be a very good football team in 2025. I think the difference between, hey, is this team just good in 2025 or is this team great in 2025 really lies within these year two guys. These guys that were freshmen last year, some maybe played a role, but it was kind of small. And then how big can that jump be going into 2025? I'm talking Justin Scott. I'm talking about a guy like Armando Blunt. I'm talking about a guy like Jordan Lyle, JoJo Trader. Those are the names that I think have a ton of opportunity to not only play a ton in the spring game, but really have a ton of opportunity to have a big impact on this football team in the 2025 year. Who are the players that need to step up? I'll just be quite frank. I was going to limit it to 5 players. And then I was kind of prepping as like, we're just going to run through this roster and talk about players I'm excited about. I was not going to talk about this spring game and only talk about 5 players. Fired up to get into it. We are essentially just going to empty the clip here, empty the notebook. All the things we've talked about in spring practice kind of culminates in the spring game Saturday afternoon. Now, before we get into it, as always, to the Miami Hurricane fans, appreciate you guys. It's really been so fun talking this program over the last couple of weeks, and y'all have been super engaged, showing a ton of support to the fellas. That stuff means the world. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, I want to start with something general. Before we get nitty gritty and start talking about some nitty gritty portions of this roster, specifically on defense. I want to see what this new defense looks like under Corey Heatherman in this new coaching staff. And the one thing I'm most excited to see is, hey, what does the communication look like? Are we being better about not giving up explosive plays? I was going back to, Miami's defense in 2024, which was a disaster, especially down the stretch. The biggest problem that emerges, and the film says it, but also the numbers say it, is this Miami Hurricanes defense was not that bad from a down-to-down basis, but man, were they miserable giving up explosive plays. I mean, this was a defense that was top 40 in yards per carry allowed and yards per pass allowed, top 40 in the country, but then was outside of the top 70 in points per game because, hey, we might have 2 really good plays, but then we give up an explosive, and those will kill you in the landscape of college football. Playing good defense, it starts with creating negative plays, but it also starts with not giving up explosive plays. That was a problem for Miami in the 2024 year. Does it get better in the spring game? You'll kind of get a sense of, hey, are these guys communicating better? Are we playing more disciplined football with their eyes and with our communication? And then I think, secondly, hey, and Corey Heatherman and a bunch of the players have been very vocal about this. This is a defense that is going to be a little bit less complicated, and we're just going to let our football players go fly around and make plays, which I love for Miami. We've said this a lot. This is a very good defense with a lot of NFL talent. Don't slow these guys down by overcomplicating the scheme. And I'm not saying you run a vanilla scheme really plan, although that's what we're going to see on Saturday. I'm not saying you oversimplify it, but there's a fine line to walk between making it so complicated that you're affecting how your players play. And I think we kind of saw that in the 2024 year. Let these guys go out there, pin the ears back, and go fly around to the football. That's what you're hearing these players say throughout spring practice. It's a little bit more simple. It's allowing us to be just put in spots where we can go and make plays and impact the football game. Really fired up about that. Now, getting into some specific things we want to see, I think a lot of Miami Hurricane fans would probably start with the secondary. And we're going to talk about that. And I'm fired up to see what the secondary looks like more from a rotational standpoint, like where are guys slotting in and what are they asked to do. I want to start with the defensive line. This is, to me, arguably the biggest storyline for this Miami Hurricanes defense. I look at the secondary and say it's going to be better. The players are better, so it's going to take a step. Where I look at this defense and say, can it really be great in 2025? To me, it starts on the defensive line. It starts with how disruptive and how dominant this group can be. I've been very vocal. You go back to the last couple of years in college football, team like Ohio State last year, team like Michigan 2 years ago, the Georgia teams, they all have one thing in common. They won their national championships in different ways, but they all had a dominant defensive line. They had a dominant and deep defensive line. Now, the name that I'm most excited to see is freshman Hayden Lowe. The returns we have gotten from this kid are glowing. And I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to see Hayden Lowe have an impact similar to how Ruben Bain did his true freshman year in 2023. The next player is Justin Scott, who has transformed his body. A guy that I think we all need to remember was not early enrolled last year. He was not even on campus for Miami at this point last year. His first full winter conditioning period, his first full spring practice. I expect a big jump from Justin Scott. Can he be the game wrecker that Miami brought him in to do in that 2024 class? Armando Blunt, very similar conversation, was a guy that reclassified, was young for being a freshman last year. What's the year two step there? I would probably throw in a guy like Donta Simpson. We're looking for some depth emerging on the defensive line. Can he be a guy? Does he look like a guy that can play 10 to 15 snaps a game for Miami in a rotational role? Really big storyline. The last player I'll say is Marquise Lightfoot, a guy that very quiet first year, which was not all that much of a surprise for us. We talked about Marquise Lightfoot being a little bit of a project coming out. He was a 5-star, but he was a 5-star because of the potential, not necessarily where he was as a football player. It was a quiet first half of spring practice for Marquise Lightfoot. You've started hearing some chatter about Marquise Lightfoot in the back half of spring practice. What does he look like in this spring game? And is he ready to not necessarily play a massive role, but what if he's just a pass rush specialist for Miami on 3rd and long? That'd be huge for the Miami Hurricanes going into 2025. And I think I'm excited to see what the frame looks like. Defensive line is probably going to be where my eyes are. That's going to be a competitive battle between a very good offensive line and a defensive line that I think can be very good. And we're going to get a sense of how good they're going to be after the spring game Saturday. Linebacker room, are we good enough? Do we need to add in the transfer portal? It is probably the question. It's been one of those positions that we kind of highlighted heading into spring practice that might have been a little bit of a question mark. I don't think we've heard enough out of spring practice to give us a ton of confidence in this unit. I think the conversation for me is, okay, you might not have an All-American in this room. You might not. And that's okay because I think you got a lot of All-American caliber guys all over this roster, just probably not in the linebacker room. Are we good enough? Are we disciplined enough? Are we making tackles in space? Are we fitting the right gaps? I don't need to see a linebacker come out and be a first-team All-American guy in the spring game. What I do need to see is these linebackers knowing what they're doing and fitting the run the right way and not being lost out there. Because if you get that, if you just get solid linebacker play, this defense is going to be good. But I think the question we have is, hey, do we have enough guys that we trust to play in 2025? I think you have one in Wesley Bassane. I think Jalen Alderman's a solid veteran name. You've heard some good things from Chase Smith. I think we're looking at, hey, Bobby Pruitt, Popo, Kellen Wiley is a true freshman. Where are we at with this linebacker room? Secondary rotation, I think, look, I'm blindly I'm excited to see Xavier Lucas out there opposite OJ Frederick. The boundary cornerback play is going to be very good for Miami. I'm interested to see what that nickel role looks like in terms of the competition. Charles Brantley's come in. He was kind of, to me, the expected starter if they were going to move him to nickel, which it sounds like they are. Damari Brown apparently is giving Charles Brantley a run for his money, which I think it fires you up if you're a Miami Hurricane fan. How does that competition play out where we kind of know what our boundary cornerbacks look like? How are we doing at nickel? And then do we have another safety opposite Zachariah Poyser that can play? Whether it's Markeith Williams, whether it's Dylan Day, whether it's Saquon Patterson, we're hearing that this is another position that Miami probably will want to address in the transfer portal. But again, this spring game's an opportunity for some of those safeties to show that, hey, I can be a guy that you can rely on in the 2025 year. Switching to the offensive side of the football, obviously Carson Beck will not be participating. The storyline for me is two things on the offensive line. I think most importantly, depth, which is something I think I believe in for Miami. Like, I look at that starting five. That starting five is going to be damn good. You might have two starting tackles that are going to be picked in the top 50 of the NFL draft. Francis Mauigoa it will be. And then Markel Bell, I'm really excited for. Depth here. What does Samson Okunlola look like going into year 3? Is he the guy that can be that sixth man on the offensive line that could play guard if you need him to, can play tackle if you need him to? He's a guy that, it's been a slower burn and you're wouldn't say concerned about it, but you're kind of trying to figure out if it's going to work with Samson Okunlola at Miami. I think SJ Olu Fatuli at center, you've gotten really good returns from him. Can he be that center too? Do you trust a freshman to be your center too going into 2025 where, hey, James Brockemeyer, if he has to leave for two series in a game, do you trust a freshman to come in there and play? We're probably going to see a lot of SJ in the spring game. Matt McCoy, Tommy Kinsler, not sure how healthy all those guys are, but you want to get a sense for where the depth sits on this offensive line. Because I have a feeling you're probably not going to see a ton of Francis Maui and a ton of Inez Cooper. Like, we know those guys can play. You don't have to have them play that much. I'm also intrigued about Markel Bell going up against some edge rushers that have some really good speed. A guy like Marquise Lightfoot, maybe a guy like Booker Pickett. How does he do? Because that's where you saw him get into a little bit of trouble. He's a big body, and sometimes you saw that outside shoulder get attacked a little bit. Where's Markel Bell in his development? A guy that I thought played solid football for Miami in 2024. Where's he at going into 2025? Can he be that top 50 NFL draft pick that I think a lot of Miami Hurricane fans expect him to be? Probably the biggest question mark on offense, the freshman wide receivers. We've heard glowing returns from Malachi Tony, Joshua Moore, and Dalen Upshaw. This is live here. You're gonna have a little bit of a crowd. You're gonna have a real college football Saturday simulated. Are these guys, hey, it's one thing to show out in spring practice. The closed practices, not a ton of people watching you. And it's another thing to kind of put on the pads, the helmet, ideally full contact, and say, hey, can you go play for us? That's where it starts, and then you're fired up to see what JoJo Trader looks like. This kid sounds like he's a legitimate wide receiver one, and don't rule out Elijah Lofton too. He's a guy that has really had a good spring, had a good spring last year as well. He could be one of the better tight ends in the country. And then I think the last question, again, at the quarterback spot, it's do we have who's quarterback 2 is probably the question, right? Luke Nickel, Judd Anderson, Emory Williams. Like, who has the best Saturday, and who do we trust to be that number 2 behind Carson Beck? Because it sounds like it's been a little inconsistent during spring practice. Running back 3. This kind of tells you where Miami is as a football team. This is a question that we have. We're talking about who's the third running back on this roster. Mark Fletcher, Jordan Lyle, really good combination here. Now the question is that running back 3, where if Mark Fletcher or Jordan Lyle have to miss a few games, who's going to be the guy that's getting worked into the rotation? You're kind of lung. You got Wheatley Humphrey. You got a guy in Gerard Pringle, who both of those guys are a little bit smaller, really fast, but a little bit smaller. Do we trust that one of those running backs to be a guy that can give us some carries, reliable carries in 2025 if we need them to? And if not, you might want to look for one more running back in the portal, which is not a spot you want to be, because it's going to be hard to get a running back to come into the running back room. There's going to be running backs in the portal that want the opportunity to play. Well, you probably ain't going to get a ton of opportunity with Mark Fletcher and Jordan Lyle in that room. So you probably need a running back 3 to step up. Who's it going to be? We'll probably get a feel for that in the spring game as well. That'll do it. A lot of fun storylines, a lot of fun players to watch. I'm fired up. Not really sure. I'm hoping to get some sort of stream on it. I might have to just kind of follow along with some of y'all. And hey, I'm going to lean on you guys. Some of the most supportive fans to the boys, y'all might have to be letting it fly, sending us some. We had some emails sent to us about Clemson. We had some Twitter DMs. I would love to hear from you guys too, who are going to be at the game. So I know a lot of y'all going to be there on Saturday. All right, we'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it again. Been a blast talking this team in spring practice. Fired up about what we're going to hear in the spring game Saturday. And we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.